Welcome from me, Chandradasa. Lovely to see everybody. Most of you, I think, were here last time, so you probably know the score by now. This is a set of conversations with Paramananda, who's going to speak to himself in a little minute. As ever, I'm just really grateful to work with Paramananda. I love working with you, Paramananda, and it's just such a boon to have these kind of events, I think, to keep alive a sense of community across the globe when everything is still a bit constrained and locked down and restricted. Yeah, being able to have this kind of touchstone of a space still matters to me, at least after a year, and I think it matters to most people I know. And again, Paramananda will introduce her more in a minute, but welcome to Dayajyoti, who's today's special guest. Slash victim, depending on how she's feeling about it. And I'm really happy to have Dayajyoti here today. I haven't met Dayajyoti, I haven't met you many times, but I do remember running into you in Bristol a couple of years ago at the Buddha Centre there. One of our team actually had just got ordained and Dayajyoti was there. And Dayajyoti and I have been exchanging messages over the years about a particular interaction I had with Sangharakshita, once where he said to me that Free Buddhist Audio was one of the two most important things that had happened in Triratna for about 20 years. And I said, oh, what was the other one? And he said, Buddhafield. Dayajyoti is like born in Buddhafield, as it were. She's a fantastic ambassador for Buddhafield and everything that it stands for. I'm sure we're going to hear more about that today, but thanks for coming, Dayajyoti. And Paramananda, I'll pass over to you. I hope it's going to be another beautiful conversation between friends.
Thank you, Chandradasa. Yes, so welcome to our, well, it's actually the third conversation, isn't it? But it's the second one in the live conversation. And this week, as Chandradasa said, I'll be talking to Dayajyoti. Actually, I don't know Dayajyoti that well. I've met her, well, numerous times, but over the last, I was thinking about this. I spent most of the 90s, I was in America. And during that time, there was something very special blossoming in England that was Buddhafield. It started, I think, before I left for America, but it sort of came into its own during the 90s. And I was very interested in it at the time, but of course I was living on a different continent, so I didn't get involved with Buddhafield until I came back in about 2001, I think it was. And I started participating in Buddhafield, and it was through Buddhafield that I first came across Dayajyoti. And then I've had interactions with her since then over the years. And I've always been delighted when I have met her. I've always enjoyed speaking about meditation with her. She's a serious meditator in my mind. Takes her meditation seriously and has interesting things to say about meditation. And she is, as Chandradasa said, has been for a long time now, quite a prominent and important part of Buddhafield. With all that entails, and I hope some of that will come out this evening, this afternoon. And yes, I'm delighted to have her here. And I think we're going to start as usual. Dayajyoti's brought along something to start off the conversation, as it were. So we're going to start with that. So if you're ready, Dayajyoti, I'll hand over to you. And
Thanks, Paramananda. I'm going to start with playing a piece of music. Played this recently on a retreat that I was teaching on, so a couple of people here will have heard it. It's by Chopin. So this is Berceuse Lullaby by Chopin. I was looking at the words that I wrote to describe this. So I sometimes do a dance meditation called Dharma Dance. And I sometimes use this track at the end. And so I sort of write little descriptions of tracks so I can remember what I like. And I wrote exquisite, ethereal, meditative, serene, and tender. And I was reflecting that in some way this reminds me of Tara. It evokes Tara. I think there's something about the tenderness, but also it's not, there's that sort of slightly otherworldly feeling. And the way I sense Tara is that it's a consciousness, it's a heart mind that's kind of absolutely accepting and tender to whatever experience is arising, but not entangled. Not entangled. So that's that sort of ethereal, slightly not of this world, but at the same time really, really of this world, really open to anything that arises in this world. Have you heard that before, Paramananda?
I haven't ever heard it before, I don't think. I'm not muted, am I?
No, we can hear you.
Oh, good. Oh, good. I thought
Yeah.
I was muted.
Yeah.
I'll beat myself up now. But no, I don't know that I've ever heard that before, actually. I'm not really, I'm not really a classical, you know, never quite been my genre of music, but yeah, like I can see why it might well inspire you.
Yeah, just remembering something I've really enjoyed in doing those Dharma dance sessions is using a really wide range of different kinds of music and putting in some classical stuff, almost like a surprise element. But yeah, mixing it up with reggae and jazz and all sorts. Haven't done them for a while, but is something I really enjoy doing. It's like a sort of Dharma 5 rhythms with the stages the stages of the system of practice and finishing with a just sing.
Yes, I used to do meditation and dance retreats with Shiva Chitta.
Yeah.
5 rhythms played a while ago now. I suppose actually that brings us quite nicely onto Buddhafield in a way, doesn't it? As a part of Triratna that perhaps have had a more experimental, do you think that's a word which you use, an experimental approach to trying to communicate the essence of the Dharma?
Yes, definitely. And that's part of what I've really loved. Can feel very, very creative. Yeah, including rituals. We've been pretty experimental on the rituals front at the festival, particularly. Sort of blending pagan elements and yeah, and lots of strong sort of celebratory aspect and singing and dance, and I just really love that.
And that was your first contact with Triratna, was through Buddhafield, wasn't it? So you are,
yeah, that's right. Yeah, and that was my first contact with the Dharma. I mean, I'd read, I think, a book by Thich Nhat Hanh, The Miracle of Mindfulness, classic by Thich Nhat Hanh. That was the only Dharma book I'd read, and then I met Buddhafield at a festival where they were running a cafe and teaching meditation and doing some talks as well. Gogi Patti was there doing some talks as part of an activist space, actually.
So did you go there as an activist? Were you already an activist there?
No, I mean, I went with a friend who's an activist, actually, and she took me to that activist space and to the cafe because she'd met Buddhafield before.
I suppose the other thing, when you were playing that music and you said that it, for you, how do you put it? I don't know, but anyway, reminded you or invoked Tara. I immediately thought, well, whenever, because my connection with Buddhafield has been mainly doing those longer meditation retreats. And she always does seem to be the perfect kind of, I use the word deity, I don't know, the perfect archetypal figure for Buddhafield, because it is literally, isn't it, in the green, it's in the trees. It seems to be her realm in a way.
Yeah. Yes, that's right. It's just that is reminding me of one of the total immersions where Maitri Devi was doing, she was there and doing rituals, and she made this amazing sort of offering shrine thing in the woods with the words Om Tare Tu Tare made out of sort of found natural objects just at the base of this tree. And it was just, really beautiful, very fitting, felt.
We've got her next week.
Yeah, is that next week? Yeah. I've sometimes felt that like some of what Maitri Devi does at Taraloka is more Buddhafield than Buddhafield. It's she definitely holds something of the spirit of Buddhafield, I think. And she did do a couple of seasons, I think, with us. Yeah, fantastic rituals.
Yeah, no. Yeah. I mean, I suppose that's the thing about Buddhafield, isn't it? That it arose out of, maybe it's too strong to say in reaction to, but it kind of, it arose out of, what was a Western Buddhist order then, wasn't it? The Triratna. But of course, it's also fed back into it, hasn't it? I mean, I think it's had quite a big influence on a lot of people, Buddhafield. And it's sort of seeped into, I think it's perhaps it's a more radical approach has seeped back into the movement to some extent in a more general way.
Yeah, I think so. I think we've had quite an influence. I'm always amazed sometimes at order events and people, there's just such a lot of people who've had a connection with Buddhafield in some way. You know, they've been to the festival or they've been on the families retreat or something. So we have had quite a wide reach, I think. It's dear to a lot of people's hearts, even if they're not so directly involved or not anymore.
No, I think it is very special for a lot of people. Well, the experience of being, I mean, the thing I've always felt about Buddhafield is the kind of nearest we get to perhaps practicing in a way that is somewhat similar to how the historical Buddha practiced. You know, we have the, of course, he was sometimes the inside, but you know, he was meant to spend most of his time wandering, wasn't it, and teaching under trees and things. You know, one of the things I really love about Buddhafield is that just being out in the elements and out in the natural world.
Yeah.
For you, what is the relationship between the kind of Dharma practice and the natural world? If you've got any thoughts about that, you know, how those two, how the natural world.
Well, if we let it, you know, the natural world is just teaching us the Dharma, really. It's showing us impermanence. And this is something that can go in quite deeply, perhaps especially if you're working for Buddhafield. So I've sort of done the whole range of work for Buddhafield, you know, from loading vans and putting up structures and to the more, you know, cooking and the organizational side. But when you are doing that work, you're just there with the impermanence when you're living on the land like that and constantly changing. And yeah, the fact that you can't control it, there has to be a sort of surrender to that. It's not like, you know, we have a much greater degree of apparent control when we're living in a house. So yeah. I think, yeah, and that the interconnectedness is just so apparent, or non-separateness.
I remember the first meditation retreat I did for Buddhafield, and it just rained every day.
Yeah. It can happen.
It was awful, but it was also wonderful, you know.
Yeah. I mean, it always amazes me that people, even when the weather is bad, it doesn't seem to, I mean, it can be tricky, obviously, but people always seem to kind of rise to it, even when it's been a real muddy meltdown. You know, it brings out that kind of people helping each other, looking out for each other. It comes out very strongly in those conditions, actually.
It does, doesn't it? I mean, it feels, you know, it is a sense of really living with other people, isn't it? Which you don't really ever get in that Buddhist centre in the same sort of way. I suppose you get it through community life, but it is kind of a broader sense of community life in a way, isn't it?
Yeah.
You do live as a community.
Yeah. That's right. And you're kind of perhaps more in it all together than sometimes a conventional retreat centre. Remember somebody commenting on this we did a training for ordination retreat at Butterfield a couple of years ago with the T-Rat and Loka team, and people were saying, gosh, you really get to know the order members a lot more, and you're kind of brushing your teeth alongside them in a way you wouldn't be in a retreat centre, and they really liked that. There was a kind of levelling, or seeing people more in the round, that was really positive, I think. Yeah.
And with your own meditation, I wonder, I suppose I'm always interested, I've always been interested myself, the kind of, what's the kind of dynamic between personal practice, you know, because in some ways, of course, meditation is a very personal thing, isn't it? It happens inside of our psyche, as it were, you know. And I've always been interested with that and how that relates to community, you know, how that becomes a collective practice.
Yeah.
What is, you know, what's that relationship, you know?
Yeah. I remember, I've been quite struck sometimes when I've been on what we now call the village retreat, the Butterfield Families Retreat. It can be quite hectic, lots of small children, and definitely not quiet. Sometimes I've had really deep meditations on that retreat. I thought, what is that? It's because I found the being around the children is really heart-opening, actually. So it's not always the conditions that we think might be conducive. The sense of the community around us can be very, very strong.
I wonder, I don't know how to put this really, but I was thinking about this morning actually, that, you know, my sort of reading of early Buddhism, or of the Buddha, was that, yes, he was, of course, interested in offering some relief for individual suffering, but he was also, seems to me, interested in transforming the world, if you like, you know, transforming on a social level as well, you know. And these days, I can't help thinking that a kind of individual transformation is not enough, is it? Well, it doesn't seem to be enough, you know. We seem to be in quite a crucial situation where we all need to be concerned with the world, you know, the outside world, not just what's going on in our own heads, if you like, our own hearts. And of course, the two aren't discontinuous, but I think one of the things, well, one of the reasons I wanted to talk to you actually was because, you know, you strike me as someone that has got it's a crude way of putting it, but some kind of political sense, or what did, I'm reminded of Sangharakshita's one of his little aphorisms where he says, awareness is revolutionary, you know. I wonder how you respond to that remark.
Yeah, I've always liked that. I think we should have it as the theme, the Butterfield theme one year. It would be great. I think that's part of what I enjoy in Butterfield, actually, is that there is a strong ethos of social, environmental engagement. That's very much alive. Yeah, it's just really part of the fabric. So yeah, just one example, that we always have organic food, and that's just a very strong value that doesn't get questioned, even though we're, even when we're really broke, which we are at the moment, that still feels fundamental thing to uphold. Yeah. I remember, Thich Nhat Hanh said that Buddhism's not really Buddhism if it's not engaged.
No.
And that feels right to me. It has to be. So I like the fact that, but if we would do, there's a range of stuff we're doing. It was sort of from intensive meditation retreats, like ones you teach, through to stuff that's much more for beginners, and stuff that's much more about social and environmental issues. One of my favourite things we do is the Green Earth Awakening, like a smaller than our festival, which is focused on this area.
I wonder to what extent, our own personal, development, I'm not necessarily that comfortable with that word, but that would do. Our own kind of development necessitates a kind of reopening or opening to the natural world.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it's very apparent in doing Buddhafield events how there's a kind of natural unfolding that seems to happen in people, and just from spending time living on the land. There's a relaxing and an opening, and just a sort of homecoming and healing, I guess. So I think that in itself is really important. I remember we had a webinar with a Cooper recently, and he was saying something like that just being in nature is really an important part of addressing the eco-crisis, really. I guess it's just directly addressing that alienation that we are in, that state of alienation that we're in to a greater or lesser degree in our culture, in our society, that disconnect is directly addressing that. It was really heartening to hear, actually, that just that in itself is really valuable, really worth doing, really important. But I really appreciate what you do, Paramananda, on the total immersion. It feels like there's such a fit there between what you teach, the Dharma that you teach, and the context, the Buddhafield context. And that's what I really like to try and do, and love us to, we can do at best. It is really sort of draw the teachings out of that experience of living on the land, being close to the land. But you do that very beautifully. I think people really recognise that. People really love and appreciate what you do on those retreats in Buddhafield, and it's because of a sense of like the context really meeting the teachings, the way that you express the teachings just really fits.
Well, it's always such a treat for me. I'm quite an urban person, really. I've spent all my life in big cities as well. I was in San Francisco. That can't really be called a big city, but other than that, I've always lived in London. And but I do, there is exactly what we've been talking about. I find, after a few days living in the field, a bit reminiscent actually for me. As a kid, my family always went camping. You know, we couldn't afford anything else, but I used to love that camping and just being out in the field somewhere. I mean, what it was interesting. I was talking to Papa Matthew last week, and he's probably quite an urban guy as well. But you know, one of the things came up for me in that conversation was also how we can find soul in the city as well, and as though perhaps it's more you know, easier in the when we're in the beautiful piece, living on a beautiful piece of land. It's really sort of obvious in a way, but actually, it's also important to find a sense of soul in the city, isn't it? And
Yeah.
I've been struck during this pandemic where a lot of people have, well, I say a lot, I've certainly talked to a number of people who, you know, during this last year or so have experienced a really powerful connection with trees, you know, maybe a tree in their neighborhood that they would just go and visit, you know. I've got this little little grove of redwood trees at the end of my road. God knows what it's doing, and I don't know. It's in Brent actually. It's just across the border. Well, I don't know what the Brent Council were thinking of when they planted these 5 redwoods on the corner. But anyway, that out there, and I mean, and since I've lived here, which is 6 years now, those trees have just become so important to me. You know, I can't walk past them without thinking them at all. And whenever I go away, when I come back, it always feels like they're there. You know, and yeah, that brings sense, you know, into my immediate environment.
Yeah, and the elements are still there in the city, aren't they? We did this earth, water, fire, air, space. We did this event recently, online event, Woodfield, for a whole month called At Home with the Elements.
All right.
So I became aware of this. You know, you can connect with the water element when you're washing up. You know, connect with the fire element when you're making a cup of tea. It's possible. Yeah. I remember years ago hearing somebody talking about how she made it a real practice living in the city to just be on the lookout for beauty in little moments. You know, there's a light falling on something after dark, and just thought that was fantastic because it is there, and we're open to it, looking out for it. Paramananda, I wanted to, when I was thinking about what I'd like to talk about in terms of sources of inspiration, I wanted to mention this woman, Dia Khan, who's she's a Muslim woman living in this country, born in Norway, I think, and she's a filmmaker. And I first heard about her in one of those the courageous conversations about race, the one where there was order members of colour, and somebody mentioned this film that she'd made, which is called White Right Meeting the Enemy. And she made this film. She went to the States and made a film with white supremacist people, including some leaders of those movements. And she kind of, you know, those people who were willing to speak with her. And she managed to befriend some of these people and actually make a profound connection with them. And I was just so moved by this film. and I watched an interview with her and Russell Brand, where she's sort of unpacking a bit more what she was trying to do. And I've asked her to the festival, actually, to Buddha Film Festival, and she's gonna, hopefully she's gonna come. She'd like to come, schedule allowing, because I thought it'd be great to have a Muslim woman speaking in the Dharmapala, because I feel like what she's doing is basically embodying the teaching that hatred won't ever cease with hatred. Not by hatred is hatred ever pacified in this world. It's pacified by love. I was just really moved by some of what she said about why she'd done what she'd done. I'm just going to quote a few things. So she said that in sort of befriending these people, she thought it was important to recognize ourselves in each other. So not reduce people to their views. Locate the humanity in somebody else, because if you're not seeing the humanity in them, then you're doing exactly what supremacists, racists are doing to you. They're reducing you to your color, to your ethnicity. And she said, as much as for ourselves as for them, in an attempt to hold on to our own humanity, we need to do this. Recognize ourselves in each other. If I'm willing to dehumanize someone else, then there's no difference left. And if we give up on others, we're giving up on ourselves. And she talked about complexity, how we have to allow people to be complex. It's not supposed to be convenient and simple. It's supposed to be complex and messy and human. So it had quite an effect on me, and made me think about how I can just hold on to my points of view with people who, have there's much less distance really than the people she was trying to connect with. That, made me think that meeting hatred with love is possible. It actually really is possible, even in an extreme situation like that. But it also showed how incredibly difficult it is. Chandra Das has put the link there. I think that you can't watch the whole film now because it was because they took it down. I think that might be just a preview, because it contravenes hate speech actually in this country because of what the people she interviewed said. But you can see the Russell Brand interview.
I don't know what, it sounds an amazing project that she undertook there. Do that.
Yeah, really amazing, and at quite a sort of personal risk as well. It's quite some dodgy situations she ended up in.
Actually, I've got a friend in America that organizes a Buddhist. I don't know if she still does it. I haven't been in touch with her for quite a while, but she's a filmmaker, and she organizes this traveling Buddhist film festival. It takes place across the world every year. Maybe I wonder if they know each other. Might be worth putting them in touch with each other if they don't know each other. She made a film called Prayer for the Enemy, which was about the Tibetan Buddhist nuns. I don't know.
Prayer for the Enemy.
Yeah, Prayer for the Enemy. It's a fantastic film, actually.
The Chandradasa you put, it's all there in the US. It is, yeah. That was part of why she made the film in the States, I think, is because the laws are different. And this country, it was taken off because there are different laws around hate speech.
Do we do enough, do you think? I don't know who we are. I suppose I came from a kind of political background into Buddhism, I suppose. And I've always, wondered or felt and us as a Buddhist movement hasn't been engaged enough, I suppose. I mean, I don't know what that, that's an amorphous idea, isn't it? And I know in recent years that it has become a bit more engaged. One of the things that struck me about Buddhism in America when I lived there, that it more or less seemed to go hand in hand, actually. Most of the Buddhists in America did seem to be engaged in what I broadly call the political arena, or socially engaged, more so than Triratna, with the exception of India, of course. Which,
Yeah. It's interesting, isn't it? I wonder why it has gone that way there. Hopefully we will go more that way.
Yeah, I don't know. I think it is partly historical, because I think in the sort of 50s and 60s in England, Buddhism was a bit kind of academic, I think at least some of the Buddhism in America is more associated with the kind of radical elements in American culture, I think, right from the beginning. I don't know. Of course, the interesting thing, I mean, like if in San Francisco, some of the oldest buildings in San Francisco, with the exception of the Spanish mission, go way back, but other than that, some of the oldest buildings in the city are actually Buddhist temples, because it was the Chinese that built the railroad, into San Francisco. And of course, most of the Chinese that worked on the railroad settled in Chinatown were Buddhist. So take a city like San Francisco, it's actually got very connection with Buddhism goes back a long way.
I think it's what I find tricky is you can't do all of it, can you? You can't do all of it. You can't be super, super engaged, and it's difficult, I think. And I think, I don't know, again, something Thich Nhat Hanh said, he said, don't worry about trying to do everything, just do one thing and do it really well. And know that because everything's interconnected, it will support everything else. So I think I come back to that. Because I find myself, more and more I'm kind of putting my energies into meditation teaching and feeling like that's sort of like the best use of me. I think you sort of have to find the best use of yourself as well.
I think so. I mean, I would agree with that. I mean, but I do think, I do see that as a kind of political act, again, in its broadest sense, Just we were talking about with the filmmaker, is an opening of the heart, isn't it? Into, if you can really make that connection with people, or get people to feel more deeply their own humanity, well, that's probably the hugely valuable thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
And hopefully will have social consequences for those people, and that we all have an effect, don't we? In one way or the other.
Yeah. I think that's really important. I think sometimes you just have to kind of can be an intention as well. If there's an intention in meditation of it being about engagement and opening, and that's so important. And even quite small things, I think, small kind of adjustments of focus can make a difference. Like with Metta Bhavana, for example, including future beings in the fifth stage, it's there in the Metta Sutta, you know, talks about those born and to be born.
Yeah.
And that to me is quite a thing, to be aware of future beings, aware of the impact, you know, of how we are connected to future beings by our actions now affecting them.
I think of the ancestors as including, like, you know, more, because the realm of the ancestors in a lot of traditions is kind of a timeless realm, you know. So in that way, of course, it includes everybody that has been, but also includes everybody that will be.
Yeah.
We've kind of dropped into this, from this timeless realm. Us people living now dropped into a kind of, you know, a realm of time, you know, but we will we will return to the timeless realm, whatever that means. But
Yeah. Oh, that's fascinating. Yeah. I mean, time is such a, I find that I don't have a very good relationship with time. I feel like I'm usually grappling with it. But, and we are very time bound, aren't we, in our society? Anything that kind of gets us out of that into a bigger perspective is in itself helpful.
usually helpful, I think.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's one of the delights of meditation, isn't it? It can disrupt our normal linear time a little, can't it?
Yeah. Yeah, and I'm very interested in stuff about the emptiness of time. It's very beautifully described in Robert Bayer's teachings. That's part of what constructs our whole fabricated sense of appearances. These appearances. It's partly the construct of time. You know, without that, you can't get a sense of a separate me and separate objects and so on. It's all part of it.
Mm-hmm.
And
That sounds fascinating. You got any more you can say about that?
yeah, I'll send you a talk. I can send you a talk. Yeah. We don't tend to think of time like that. We tend to think of it as something that's just sort of, we operate within it. It's like a given. But he's saying, no, it's conditioned as well. Yeah, it's another thing that's conditioned and conditions us.
Yeah. Yes, and there's lots of different types of time, isn't it? But I think what part of what's happened in our particular cultural epoch is it's become dominated by one sense of time. So I think in a way, circle back to Huddersfield and their experience of living in a field for a month again has disruptive a disruptive effect on our normal sense of time, doesn't it?
Yes. Yeah.
Certain ways, isn't it?
Yeah. Often people on solitary, that's a time when they can sort of finally let go of watches. And I've heard this from lots of people saying how much they enjoy that on solitary retreat, just taking off the watch and letting themselves be, just go with the flow.
Yeah.
Just notice when it's getting dark. And
we've largely lost that sense of organic time. It's been replaced by this mechanistic time.
Yeah.
All driven, well, to some degree, most of us are driven by that now.
Yeah.
Constrained and driven by it. Yeah.
Quite hard to unhook from. Actually, on my notice board, I've got a little note which was from a friend of mine, quoting a friend of mine, Matt Drake. He was saying how he gets into this thing of there not being enough time, and then he decided to reframe it as like, actually, there's, that time is full of, I've got all these precious opportunities. Time is just sort of, rather than there's all too many things to do, there's all these precious opportunities. So I wrote that. It's a little reminder. It's true. I feel that's true. I feel I have an abundance of precious opportunities in my life. A lot to be grateful for.
Well, yes, a lot to be, well, just to be alive is a lot
Yeah.
to be grateful for. I mean, not
Absolutely.
just, I don't mean that it's necessarily good or bad, it's just an extraordinary thing, isn't it, to have consciousness, you know?
Yeah.
An extraordinary thing, and that to appreciate that, I think, is,
Yeah.
gives us all a lot of meaning, isn't it? Or, you know, sometimes we can, sounds a bit ridiculous, but I think it's so easy to forget what a fantastic and fabulous and extraordinary thing it is to have some kind of reflective consciousness. It's
Yeah.
really quite inexplicable, isn't it, in a way? You know,
Yeah.
mind blowing in itself.
Yeah. Yeah, I was aware of that when we were doing the Elements event, Butterfield Elements event. I could see, oh yeah, a lot of it is that we take the elements for granted. And a lot of, yeah, so a lot of the practice, say 6 elements practice or contemplating the elements, is about not taking them for granted, but that also applies to consciousness, that we tend to take that for granted.
Yes, yeah. Yeah. We tend to take for granted that everything we've ever experienced is arising in our consciousness. It's quite a bizarre, I mean, you know, I find that quite an extraordinary thing just to remember. Really.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, that's one of my favorite reflections. Paramananda, I think
We're out of time, are we?
we are now, yeah.
So much. I'm so can't continue actually. We're beginning to. Anyway, there you go. That's anyway. That's how things go, isn't it? Anyway, thank you so much for joining me. It's been lovely talking to you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you both. Sorry to be the representative of linear time at this particular point, but I guess everybody's going to want to have their dinner or lunch or something at some point. Yeah, thanks, Jyoti, for just showing up, and it just did feel like we were just getting into the kind of really exciting stuff around what happens when you go underneath even Buddhist action into a relationship to time and consciousness, etc. Yeah, and thanks to Paramanta just for holding the space as usual, so well, so sort of interestingly. I just want to make a quick plug before everybody goes away. So Buddhafield has been a pretty amazing project. As Jyoti said, even if you don't go to Buddhafield that often, a lot of people in Triratna have been impacted by it. One of my favourite things was, I remember when Buddhafield started, and I think it's fair to say there was a little bit of suspicion about it in some circles. That be fair to say, do you think? I think so. And then I remember a few years later going to a big mainstream Triratna event, and Buddhafield were doing all the food at it and helping out with the meditation. And I was like, yes, this is what happens when people have great ideas and the mainstream culture just has to absorb them because they're so compelling. And everybody's had a hard time through the pandemic. Buddhafield's whole kind of the whole nature of what Buddhafield does is impacted by the pandemic. The inability to get together in large numbers, even outdoors, actually, and build the kind of community that they build. They've not been defeated by it, but they're definitely, as Jyoti said, under pressure from the kind of economic impact. So if you can, lots of people have been affected by the pandemic financially. So if you can, please support Buddhafield. I actually don't have a standing order to Buddhafield, and this conversation has made me feel slightly ashamed about that. I'm like, I'm going to go and take out a standing order to Buddhafield right after this, because if we don't protect it, it's going to go away, basically. There's 35 people in this conversation, more or less. If we all gave £10 a month for a year, that's like almost £5,000, which is like quite a bit of somebody's support. Anyway, whatever you can do, there's a link in the chat right now. Please go and give them some money, or at least just go and look at all the people who've given them money and bask in the love. It's really lovely to see just the list of names. And whatever ways you can support Butterfield, please do, including going in and taking part when they finally get to reopen. So thanks again, Dayajoti. Thanks to you, Paramanda. And thanks to everybody for coming. As usual, we get the lovely jamboree at the end where you can unmute and say goodbye in your own fashion.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dayajoti.
Thank you.
Paramanda.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Lovely to see
Good
you.
night.
And thanks, Paramanda too. Thanks all.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Bye-bye.